like when I started visiting customers and delivering the first ovens and talking to a lot of people, I just realized that this is not just about buying a product, right? This is also, if you see a lot of people who are receiving our product, it is a pretty emotional, it's pretty emotional in a way. We just, at first feels like, this is interesting. And I do think because this is a lifestyle decision, right? This is like people want to do something meaningful with their lives, right?
Welcome to the Breadwinner Podcast. This is the show for sourdough microbakery owners who are building a sustainable, successful, profitable business from their home. If you are already in business or if you're dreaming of starting one, this is the place for you. I'm your host, Caroline Bauer. I own a successful in-home sourdough bakery, and I am here to share everything I've learned that works and that doesn't, plus everything that I'm researching along the way so we can build thriving businesses together. Welcome back to another episode of the Breadwinner Podcast. Today's episode is a really wonderful one. I am so excited. I have been looking forward to it for quite some time. I have a guest on the show today, and I am joined by the amazing founder of the Simply Bread Company. And I would love for you to firstly let us know exactly how your name is pronounced, because I'm sure a lot of us Americans are not 100% sure. But also, you are the inventor of a bread oven that has changed the life of so many sourdough microbakery owners who are operating a business from their home. So I'd love to turn it over to you here and have you introduce yourself and just let us know a bit about your background.
Thank you. And thanks for having me. Yeah, so my name is Stijn Vanorbeek. My first name is typically pronounced Stan. I think most people try Stan. The Dutch Flemish way of saying it is Stijn. It's more like the A. IJ is it's not Stigen, as many people try, but that's okay. I got used to it after all these years. Yeah, and then so I'm the founder and CEO of Simply Bread Company, who's doing the bread baking oven, but also the app / order management platform for microbakers and other bakeries.
And I use the app and love it and have a space right there for the oven, which I
Oven
have
to come.
craving for.
We'll get that.
Tell me a little bit about how you got started. Have you always been a baker, or what led you to start the Simply Bread Company?
I mean, I of course in Europe grew up with relatively good bread, although sourdough was around, but it wasn't very popular. There was like bakers that would bake overnight, right? You still had like storefront bakeries in every town. When I was a kid, I think my mom still bikes to the local baker every day, go buy her bread. But the bakers are also getting a little bit more industrialized there. And like sourdough that was for the hippies or something. It was sort of an alternative bread type. So I didn't eat a lot of sourdough, but of course, growing up in Belgium, close to France, a lot of holidays to France. So I just pretty much grew up with a decent understanding of what good bread is supposed to be. And coming to the US, I've been coming a very long time to the US for business and pleasure. And it was just like, there's just not a lot of good bread around. I was just always disappointed with the massive amount of bread in a grocery store. And it's just, I can't eat it. And so I've been baking for many years in my Dutch ovens and giving away bread and giving it away to my neighbors and my spouse, colleagues. And then at one part, it's got a little bit out of hand. I've always worked in technology, always been an entrepreneur and wanted to do something else. And that's just before COVID, or just like when the whole COVID period was starting. And I was like, I just want to get away from my computer. I just want to do something with my hands. I always had this like secret dream of, can I just do a coffee shop or a bakery rather than being like in code and computers and spreadsheets and all day long. And so I don't know, I woke up one day. I think one of the triggers was, and a lot of your listeners will know Proof Bakery in Arizona, which around that time he put out a really good video where he's showing the process of scaling up a bakery. And that was, I think, my inspiration, where I was like, wait a bit, I think this is actually doable. I can actually do that at a little bit of a larger scale. And then I rented a commissionary sort of rental dark kitchen. That didn't really work out. It was like big convection ovens and 6 large Dutch ovens. And I was like, and then I found one of the Facebook groups where people were talking about those European ovens they were importing. I was like, how is it possible that there's no, when I saw so many people like interested in the US made oven. So that's how it all started.
That's amazing. So it was probably the Rothko was one of the only options at that point.
Like at that point, it was pretty much the only option, right?
Okay.
Which is a workhorse and has, I think, served great and has been very popular and still is, I think. And but it has its shortcomings, and you couldn't get them back then. So it was like 12-month lead time. And I'm a product developer, done a lot of robotics and mechanical engineering, electrical engineering. So I'm not going to wait 12 months for an oven. I'm not going to do this Dutch oven thing with 6 large combo cookers for a year. I just pulled out my grinder and welder in my garage and like just put some steel and started.
Wow. So you not only said this needs to be made, but you said, I think I'm the one to make it. And what was the process of going from in your garage with your welder to distributing this oven?
Yeah.
How did you know there was a demand?
I've built a few companies. I've been an entrepreneur like out of college. I never really had a job. I always joke. I've always, and over the years, I got a little bit better at validating markets and validating products where and today is a bit easier. You can make 3D renders, you can make presentations. And so I was actually inspired by a marketing personality called Seth Godin. And he was an entrepreneur. He put out a book and he said, rather than minimal viable product, something we talk a lot about in early stage companies, he talked about minimal viable audience. He says, just make a product for one person, like yourself. And that's what it was, right? Make the product you want and then make the product for 3 or 5 or 10 and make them really happy. And that's what I took. What I took, I was like, yeah, that's a really good idea. I don't need to build this big business or this big company, or it doesn't need to be this like huge venture. I just want to make 5 people really happy. I was actually like, let's build 10. I tried to sell 10 and then I get my cost back over the steel and the stuff I put in and that's okay. And that sort of like went a little bit out of hand. It just started growing. And so I did this pre-sale for a number of people, put in $200 or something, and they waited a very long time. And then we were hit with all the supply chain. Then that was the middle of COVID. So we got hit with all the supply chain problems and rising costs. And then you also just realize when you're actually doing it that, and my idea was always like to manufacture in the US because I didn't really see that. And we couldn't travel back then. I was like, I'm not going to go to China and find a contract manufacturer there and ship containers. And it was so difficult back then. So let's just do it in the US. Then you also, of course, realize that there's a cost to it. There's also a complexity to a US made product, right?
Are you looking for a high quality, flavorful organic flour that you can feel confident about offering to both your customers and to your family? So I started baking sourdough after I got fed up with buying preservative and sugar laden gluten-free bread because I have a gluten sensitivity. So I wanted to take back my own power to choose every single ingredient and know that the food I made from scratch was as nourishing as it could possibly be. And as I continue to make intentional choices about the ingredients that I choose for my family and for my micro bakery customers, I've recently started using Sunrise Flour Mill's Heritage Organic Flour. Not only is it made from 100% organic, non-GMO heritage grains, making it more easily digestible, it also just tastes so good. I feel absolutely confident that I am baking with the highest quality, most nutritious flour that I can find. And if you're looking for a flour that you can feel 100% good about, I cannot recommend Sunrise highly enough. They have generously offered 20% off to listeners of the podcast, so you can try their flour for yourself using the link down in the show notes. I think that is one of the characteristics, though, that so many people appreciate and resonate with is that it is a US made product. What were some of the other non-negotiables when you were developing the oven?
There were a few, right? So US made and supported. I just don't want to just build a kitchen appliance, right? I think it's great, but I want to do something more. I also want to have fun myself. So for me, it was actually starting it. My reason for wanting to start a small micro bakery was the same reason most of our customers do it, was for community, getting to know people, doing something meaningful, work from home, and doing this product and building this company, like I still want to, that was my original purpose to build for doing my little micro bakery, and for the purpose and the opportunity and the community part of it. And so like building, a company with several products, etc. I don't want to lose that. Right. So I think US made that supported, and that ties into the support part where we're trying to be part of the community and help people along their journey and be just a little bit more within the limits of, what we can do as a company, help people with more than just selling them a hardware product. So that was one US made and supported. The other one was probably the viewing window, with the other ovens was a bit limited. And so I wanted to do something because I was also curious, like, how did it look? And I think a lot of people appreciate that. Mm-hmm. I think the steam generation was a big challenge with the other ovens of using garden hose sprayers, etc. Although, people have been doing it works, but I was like, in this time and age, that doesn't seem, and there must be better solutions to it. And then the even baking, these are stone baking ovens. I think most people come from a convection oven. That's why we use Dutch ovens, because convection forms a crust and you don't want that. You want to have a sort of moist steam environment in the first phase of your baking. But most people are used to using Dutch ovens in a convection oven, which a kitchen oven that can heat up very fast. But historically, good artisan bread has been baked in a hard oven, right? It's a stone baking oven. And actually oven spring happens in the oven by thermal transfer from the baking stone into the dough. No, if you don't have convection in a baking oven, the top decks really get hot, right? And that's where you get into the shuffle, and you hear about people shuffling their loaves. People figure it out. Some people do better than others. But it was like, if I really want to enable and help these micro bakers be successful, I don't want them to sit next to their oven shuffling loaves and turning them around, etc. There's also only so much you can do. So that means that we needed to add some technology to it. I've got a background in data science and algorithms, etc. I know a little bit about that part. So we were able to add a little bit of technology, which does complex and adds costs, right? To solve this even baking problem by controlling the heat elements separately. And that adds a little bit of complexity, but it seems to work fairly well for most people. And then the last one was, most of the imported ovens don't have NSF, UL, and maybe have CE, but they don't have compliance and certification, which, if you want to grow this as a company and a US-based company, it seems that the other ones don't really care about the legality of it and the liability part of it. But as a US-based company, I was like, I cannot make a product that you can actually use. But it's for our own product liability insurance also plays into it. But so we got NSF, which is food safety, right? So if you, and that ties into, if you want to hire someone, for example, and you look into OSHA and to workers' comp, etc., you need to be compliant. And that's why we have these MSF sticks, and which is a very complicated, messy process, an expensive process. And UL, we're just launching, I think, and CSA, which is more electrical safety. And that also ties into insurance and liability, right? And reliability. So I think these were the sort of five must-haves, and then combining them all into one, because there's sometimes a little bit conflicting, right? And then we need to make them all work.
It's incredible. Even, I don't know that the NSF gets appreciated fully, but that sets you apart and is incredible.
It's very complicated. Yeah. Yeah. And on our side, on the manufacturer side, it's non-trivial, right? We all buy these little stainless steel tables, they're basically Chinese stainless steel tables of Amazon or of web restaurant store. They've got like an NSF label on it, but did they really send those tables to the NSF lab and pay for it? And is that really what's happening? We don't know, right? And an oven, because it's electrical and there's touch temperature requirements, etc. For example, the little display glass, they were afraid that someone would hit it with a tray and it would shatter. So we need to redesign and use this like Gorilla Glass, like on your iPhone or something. And so there's a lot to it. It just takes a lot of time and energy and money to get there, but it's great. We now have quite a few storefronts and quite a few coffee shops, and they need it actually, because otherwise you have no shop problem.
Yeah. I love getting that little inside scoop. You said in the very beginning, you sold just 10 models. What was some of the early feedback from those first people? Did it influence the final product at all? Or were there any surprises?
I think, and I do have a bit of experience in product development. I think it's the first one is like, I remember doing the first one where the door fell off, and our would open up by itself. And with tolerance problems, it gets relatively hot, right, in an oven. So you've got thermal expansion, and adding electronics to it is not easy, and you need to do electronic school. And so there's a lot of, no, I need to say that, of course, we're doing continuous improvement and trying to make it every day, especially at scale, right? If you see how many products we have out there, like at scale, you start seeing problems. Like I always say, like everything fails once, right? Everything is going to break one day. My dishwasher, my Bosch great dishwasher, high-end dishwasher just broke a few days ago. So it's for everyone the same. I think it's more reliable, like the scalability and design for manufacturing reliability than the hardware. You don't see that. It's all behind the scenes, but how it is easy to change parts, how it's easy to diagnose certain problems, etc. So I think that's probably the biggest part. The actual design is actually not that much that changed. It's just like making it better, easier to build, easier to maintain, etc. It is the behind the scenes, the work where you spend most of your energy.
Mhm. That makes sense. So there's so much, like you just said, the behind the scenes that we can't see, but you clearly have put so much intention. And I know that, for example, if something goes wrong, you're going to ship a piece, and a lot of these bakers can fix what goes wrong, which is amazing. So I'm curious if that it's part of the US made and supported, but is sustainability one of the values as well that comes into play?
I think so, because I think it's also, and of course you can only do so much, right? In the end, it's stainless steel that needs to come from a forge somewhere. Someone need to cut and fold that steel, and then we need to put it together. But there's only so much, and then the rest is a bunch of electrical components, right? Heaters and thermostats, etc., and dials. And of course, having much shorter supply chain lengths, right? The steel is actually being manufactured nearby. It's assembled in our factory, getting a product across the world. And let's be fair, like most of the products we have in our homes or where we go to Home Depot, they're like made overseas, right? They're made in the Far East. So it's probably the length of the supply chain where the biggest, and I think that also fits into, because what I most want is that our values and the values of our customers aligned, right? And I think why most customers are into this is also for the sort of like local production, short supply chain in a way, right? Locally produced food we know the source often, we know the miller or the farmer, and we know the customers we sell to in a radius of I don't know how many miles. So I think like we're trying to have a little bit the same values where we source our materials, and some of them, there's even, we get some components from overseas because, I don't know, light bulbs or light fixtures. There's just no US supplier for it. It just doesn't exist. And there's just no one. It's too much of a commodity. So you don't have a solution for that, right? And it would be nearly impossible or economically feasible to build those locally.
That makes sense. But just the way that you've built a product that is made to last, you clearly understand your customers really well. And you've built this connection in a way that they really feel understood. Whether or not they own a business, they feel connected to your company
Mhm.
and know that the Simply Bread brand is part of the sourdough microbaker community. So what have you done to connect with home bakers in such an intentional way that you've established yourself as the go-to brand?
Sure. I mean, there's no big strategy behind it. It's, I think, just that I built a product that I wanted myself and that I saw had potential. And I built one, and then I built three, and I delivered the first 20 units here. And I think I delivered it myself in my truck, and people were like, they thought I was the transport, the transport driver, the truck driver. I'm like, no, I just got to come bring your oven because I want it to work and I want to plug it in and see if everything. And it's interesting because discover all. So I think if it's authentic, right, by nature, right, if you really care and in the product you want yourself, and then the community builds, that's the best advertising, right? We're not really doing any advertising or any PR or something. So it's pretty much the community itself that builds, and you get a little bit of a loyal following. And if you then are honest and try to do the right thing, this stuff happens. Like, and it's amazing, like what we sometimes see in transport or just like crates falling off trucks. And then you just need to do the right thing. It's a big investment for people. And like, we just don't want to let them down. And then sometimes we're also limited in what we can do or how fast we can do things. But I think just like standing behind your product and trying to, just trying to care. It's the most important, right? They care about their business and about their aspirations, and rather than just wanting to sell product.
I've felt that. I'm not an oven owner yet, but with my use of the app, I've felt
Mhm.
so seen and valued, and I've interacted a fair amount with some requests and
Mm.
questions, and
Yeah.
really have felt that you all really value us and our voice, even just as a small baker here in
Sure.
small town Texas.
And there's
Serving.
limits to as a company, of course, in the end, it's a business and you need to meet payroll. And so there's just at one point also just limited resources you have as a business. But I think listening and trying to do the right thing, like with it, for example, with the app, there's some other apps out there that are more sort of generalist. We want to really focus on baking and the baking process. And we've got a bunch of cool things coming up that will differentiate ourselves. But it's a little bit the same, right? Because we're bakers ourselves. And that's the other thing. Like everyone in the company has come here and made dough and baked bread, right? From the accountant to the supply chain manager. And so that gets a little bit under people's skin, right? Because we're like, oh, wow, I can do this. And now they also feel they support people or whatever, right? They have all been here and they've all baked them. And so we're trying to not just hire someone to do support to replace a part or something, but someone can actually, and at scale, of course, gets a little bit harder, right? Because you can only spend so much time per customer. Um, but we try to keep up with it and do the right thing.
Yeah, that's wonderful. I am curious about as the brand grew. So at first you just said, I'm going to make 10 ovens and recoup my cost. And now you are a very large brand. What was the process of realizing that what you were creating was far beyond that 10
Mhm.
oven initial starting point? What are
Mhm.
some of the opportunities and surprises that came along?
Um, I mean, to be honest, I'm a bit surprised myself. And that's always the amazing part as an entrepreneur or someone who wants to do something and make a difference. It's like I couldn't invent this. I know I did, but I didn't invent the community or I didn't that create it itself. And we gave it a push maybe, and we did probably a few things. But I think for me, like when I started visiting customers and delivering the first ovens and talking to a lot of people, I just realized that this is not just about buying a product, right? This is also, if you see a lot of people who are receiving our product, it's a pretty emotional. It's pretty emotional in a way. We just at first feels like this is interesting, and I do think because this is a lifestyle decision, right? This is like people want to do something meaningful with their lives, right? They want to there maybe stay at home moms at homeschool. They maybe have the ambition of opening a small storefront in their community. They are baking for their church community. There's so many opportunity, but it's all about community and people, I think. And so I think that's what I realized at one point. Like we're not selling an oven. We're selling a lifestyle and a something of meaning, right? Something that gives meaning, something like, of course, the oven doesn't, right? But starting a small micro bakery, is very meaningful, right? It's what we hear a lot from our customers. They're saying, the thing when we ask them, what do you love the most about is this? I just walk or drive around my neighborhood and I see all these lights on and I know that these people are eating my bread, right? That's something that they're having a decent product that's important. So at one point I just realized it's more than just selling a baking oven, right? It's selling community. It's helping grow community in a way. I think that's the essence.
Mhm. That's beautiful. That's probably why so many bakers resonate, because even if you're not explicitly communicating that, we see other bakers whose lives are being changed and
Mhm.
everyone just identifies that way. That's
Yep.
amazing. And this just is a very unique community.
Yeah, and it's if you see, yeah, everyone is. If you look at some other like online communities, it can be a little bit toxic, right? A lot of communities online. I'm happy I'm not part of them. We don't really seem, and it's not just our own community, right? We have, for example, our own Facebook group with a lot of members, extremely supportive. People, we have customers that don't have an oven, and someone else buys an oven. Like I'm not saying next door, but like 3 neighborhoods over, and they go like help or get it dialed in or something. It's quite amazing, right? And I also believe that a lot of people just want good fresh bread, and there's not a lot of competition. Like there's no competition actually for it, right? Even if you got 3 bakers in the same small town, it doesn't really matter. And yeah, I think just people are just nice and helpful. I think bread is a very neutral subject in a way.
Mm.
It's been around forever. You can't fight over good bread or something. People do fight over good bread, but people fight over good bread, but not like in a toxic way or something.
That's true. I like that point that it's very neutral. It's hard to be mad when you have good bread.
Yeah, it's just basic. And I think we understand a little bit better why bread is so good, right? Or fresh bread, which helps with so many things. And it's been in most cultures. Bread is pretty essential in most cultures and religions, right? So it's not a new thing.
So I have experienced that community so much and been surprised by it too with this podcast. I've also been a little bit surprised that so many of my listeners are brand new to baking. And so for those who are not quite ready to invest in an oven, I definitely encourage them to use the app. But what is one solid piece of advice that you would share for someone who's just in the very early stages of starting their home bakery?
And we, of course, because people call in, right? These are mainly people getting their oven. So we see a little bit the challenges of scaling. To give you an idea, we had some people like trying to do 12 bowls of dough, or so making dough 12 times rather than doing it in bulk or something, just to try to figure it out. But I think getting a good control of your dough and the baking process itself, because I'm not saying it's easy, right? I remember making all these pancakes and I couldn't make it work and I didn't really understand fermentation. And there's much more information. There's a ton of good information out there and people that want to help today. So I think it's a little bit easier to get to good information. But I do think that it's sometimes missing a little bit of like, what's the right temperature? Because people don't, like, once you scale, if you do 2 loaves, your flour will be pretty much at room temperature. But now you're doing 12. Now you've got a bag of flour that has been sitting in your garage in winter. People then just new bakers or bakers that are scaling don't realize that ice cold flour. And now I've got cold water, right? So I think it's just like, it's not obvious, right? It's the same flour I'm using. I wait, but because you're pulling a bag of flour from your cold garage, that flour is really cold now, right? So you need to increase your water temperature or heat up your water a little bit to get to that mixing temperature. So I think it's like small things like that help a lot. And then with an oven, then when the oven comes into play, it gets a little bit complicated for some people because it's like, is it the oven? Is the dough temperature, is the fermentation, right? And also, for example, with the oven, where we see a lot of the people like put the temperature that we indicate for baking 12 loaves and they put 1 loaf in it and it overbakes. Because there's such massive, don't forget, we're dropping like, 600 grams of cold water times 12. That's 2 gallons of cold water you're dropping in an oven. And of course, that behaves very different than doing 1 loaf. So we see all these little scaling. It's more like not saying the science side of it, but like what influences what results, like using cold flour, cold water, starter at scale. People are like, oh, no, I need a lot of starter. You can't get it hot enough because it's just an energy problem, right? Like before, you would just have your starter for 2 loaves on the countertop. That would do. Oh, no, you've got like a big reservoir of starter, and that's, you need to use a heat mat or something or put it, so it's just a little bit of different. It becomes a little bit of a different game. So I think like understanding that a little bit better and being maybe a little bit more measuring a little bit more or something, measuring your dough temperature, measure your baking temperature, because once you know that, you can replicate it at scale. But if you already don't know at the scale of 2 or 3 or 4 loaves, it's going to be much, much harder at scale.
Mm-hmm. That's really good advice. I think that's a universal learning curve that everyone experiences, is just understanding how differently dough behaves when you're mixing up 12 loaves versus 2. Do you have a favorite resource that you point people to if you feel like they're not ready to scale up or need some help?
We've got internally a bunch of resources. So I try to do a bunch of blog articles. I think we could do a little bit of a better job at that. It's general, we can diagnose it. Now, of course, we only see when they get the oven. We don't really get involved that much earlier. And then it's sometimes a little bit hard to diagnose why people move from 2 loaves to 12 loaves. And it's difficult. And some people just figure it out, right? We've got a lot of people just figure it out. And it also depends because people move their oven into a different location, or they start making their dough in a different room that's much colder or something. But people have been baking great bread for a very long time. So it's not, and then sometimes it changes. I sometimes also have a new bag of flour and things don't turn out that well. Or sometimes I'm like, oh wow, this turned. So it still stays a little bit artisan for a reason. It's funny because I went to France last spring and went to a beautiful local baker in a small village. He still had a stone baking oven, like a wood fire stone baking oven. But if you looked at his loaves, they didn't look like all the loaves we were seeing on Instagram. Not at all. No one would put his loaves on Instagram. They were great loaves, they were great bread, right? But they were like not a beautiful ear scored. That's not what it was, right? So I think we sometimes also, especially at scale, right? Sometimes we see people that want to do very intrinsic scoring like they do with their Dutch ovens. But okay, you've got two loaves. You can score for 10 minutes your two loaves, but no scoring 12 loaves. It's going to take you an hour to score them that beautifully. Of course, it's not going to behave. I just don't think once you get at scale, there's just things you can't do anymore, right? Then you just need to do it one by one or something and not like 12 at a time.
Yeah, that's a really good point. People just, as they scale, need to adjust their expectations. And I just know that it's just a little bit of a different experience in a larger batch. For the bakers who are ready, who have their batch baking dialed in more or less, and they think they're ready to invest in an oven, what is something that they should keep in mind or some advice that you might have for them?
I think one of the things is it's always the same discussion. Do you buy an oven or you buy a mixer? I still think you can scale up without a mixer or too much of a mixer. If you buy a mixer, buy one size up. Everyone will tell you the same. You buy a mixer and in 3 weeks, you feel it's too small. So but I get it, right? It's a big investment. I think the oven, I get it. It's a serious investment for most people, right? We understand it. But I think most people who jump and take the leap, they feel after even a few weeks, like after the first bake, they're like, oh, I got so much of my time back, right? Because in the end, that's also the thing, right? It's not that quantifiable in money. Money is time, but if you're baking 12 hours a day and you don't see your family or your kids and you're just like sitting on the floor in front of an oven. So I think a lot of this first thing people say, oh, gave me back so much time. And then secondly, once you can do a bit of volume, it actually pays for itself, right? Because you can bake a little bit more, you bake 3-4 hours, makes you $500-$600. After a few months, you just absorb the cost, right? It wasn't that big of a deal. So I think that's fun to see. Yeah. And a bigger mixer, always a bigger mixer.
So buy the biggest mixer, understand that it's going to save you so much time and you'll make back that investment a lot quicker than you think you would.
Yeah.
I think that is really helpful for people who are just.
And don't hesitate to reach out. I think there's this today, people are so used to call a support line and no one answers or no one returns. Most brands today, because it's just marketing and sales, right? No one even people call our support line. And we had a potential customer that called our support line is, I just wanted to check if you guys answered the phone. And then he put in his order, right? So people are just not, it's expensive for us also to do, but if that's your mission and that's what you believe in, we should do it. And I think people just go online sometimes and they're like, just give us a call. We'll answer the phone within 16 hours or something, right? We'll answer the phone and talk to you with whatever problem you have, right? If it's like a baking problem or a scaling problem or another problem, we'll try to or help you or put you in touch with someone or point you into the right resource.
Yeah. I so appreciate that you do that. I've had some of the people that I coach who reached out to you about the app or about the oven, and they come back and they tell me even if you didn't answer the phone right away, you called back right away.
Sure.
And so that does that.
And that is good to hear. We try to.
Yeah, that's fantastic. So you have created this amazing service and product and community that serves our microbaker community. I would love to know if you're open to sharing, if you have anything exciting coming next, or what do you see the future of the Simply Bread brand looking like?
And of course, I have too many ideas, and not enough time in mind to do them all. So it's always like picking. But I think we would like to get maybe a little bit more involved in the accessory business, right? It's not a money maker, but it's just being more of a one-stop shop, right? So that's something we want to work on. So a little bit more accessories and equipment. We're looking at a few things we could launch. I think longer term, I think ingredients is still something I would like to look at with so many bakers in our network, because I can get excellent flour here in Southern California, but we have a lot of bakers where it's just hard to get specialty items, right? Like einkorn or maybe seeds and that, of course, a whole other problem. It's something I would love to look into. It comes down to another logistics problem and it's complex supply chain. But that's something I would like, or maybe something special that someone else can do, right? And it's specific to more the small size factory market. We see a large opportunity for like education. Like we're also manufacturing. If most US users don't see this, but we're also manufacturing and selling the oven in Europe and the Middle East and Northern Africa. And we've got a manufacturing facility in Europe. That means also we're building up, and we only started like not that long ago in Europe, but we also have access to some local European bakers we could bring over to give some class. So that's something, of course, that's something I would so love to do, right? Bring a French baker over or a German baker and do some classes. And the last thing we're seeing is there's a lot of people who they start with a kitchen oven, buy an oven, buy sometimes two ovens, and know they would like to have a little physical location or a storefront, like going more into physical location. We get a lot of questions about that. And we would love to help those bakers. People want to bake and often people don't have a background. So we would like to help them with whatever it is. Just open a physical location, and again, in the same sort of idea of advising and sharing best practice, etc. So people who are to go that route, feel free. I don't want to go to the massive bakery or big deck ovens, and it's a huge investment, and something more like on a smaller scale. So just people who are looking into that, I would love to talk to them and see how we can. And then the platform, of course, which on one side is an order management system for the moment, and where the big component is these text messages, right? Because then to keep your audience engaged, because that's what most people struggle with, and where I struggle with, like Facebook and Instagram and spreadsheets, and I've got my hands full of dough, and so that's where the app does well. We would love to build a community and a store and much more functionality into the app. And then it's like more, we've got so many ideas, how the app can be more like a central location for helping community. So we're working a little bit on that. And then the very last one, but that's more of a personal one, is I want to do these like baking trips or something. I want to organize like a French baking trip and go and take a few classes in Paris and in the south of France, and I'll go to Germany. And but that's more of a personal project, because I think if I put something on,
that sounds amazing.
if there's some travel agents listening, or people who know how to set up like photography trips, or, there's all these sort of travel trips, right? So it's like, what if we do a simply prep French tour for 10 days or something, some great, take some classes or something. So that's my personal, that's one.
Oh, that sounds incredible. Wow. I'm a big believer that when you start speaking about it, things start to happen. That's amazing. I had one question as you were talking that came to mind that's not in the outline, but I'm curious. We've seen, so in 2020 or so, sourdough had a resurgence, and then it seems like it is having a second resurgence, and there are so many micro bakeries popping up every week. Do you think it's just going to keep growing, or do you think it's going to taper off? The way that you're growing your business, it seems you think it's here to stay.
Yeah, of course I do believe. Otherwise I would go do something else, right? I spend all my time and energy on this. So I need to be bullish about the market. Don't have a crystal ball, right? Is it the fad? Is it something? But and we start seeing some data. It seems to be, there must be, and I haven't figured that really out yet, but there must be a social demographic change in the world we live in today that is pushing people towards something like this, right? I think it's the realization that our food system is terrible. In a lot of places, when I travel through the US, it's very hard to find fresh, good food. We see all the problems around whatever. 70% of the Americans have metabolic disease, and 40% have got diabetes. There's such a huge epidemic of food-related health problems. But I think people start realizing that and start seeing that. I think there is the idea of locally sourced ingredients locally. And then also that idea of, I think we're living in a very complex world today with a lot of technology. And I think people just want to, my idea was always, I had two ideas or two sort of taglines. One is like bringing the village baking oven back to the village. I know they always say like it takes a village to raise a child. And I think it takes a baking oven to build a village or something. So I think this idea of building communities and support systems, and especially if it's tied into food, what is better? It's not Uber or Lyft that's going to do it. You know what I mean? Like they're doing the opposite in a way. They're making them more distributed. They're more disconnected. Do you know your cab driver, your Uber driver? You see him only once in your life, right? Not the guy next door who always picks you up, right? So I think that has been happening in society for a very long time. I think we're at a sort of point where We want to go back to community, go back to having better and healthier food choices. So there must be a sort of socio-demographic background to all of this that is maybe a little bit hard to read or to understand. And so if we see it in that optic, I think it's got a huge future. People are gonna keep eating bread, I think. And we see it over and over again. Once the product is available, it works. People love it. I still bake on Thursdays, and sometimes I go stand outside. I push the button. I don't know if you have the same experience. I push the button of the app that it's ready for pickup. They come out of I don't know where everyone comes from. They seem to be sitting there waiting or something, but they just seem to rush and swarm and pick up their bread. It's crazy. How's that possible? So I'm not too worried. If you have a product or if you make a product that is so honest and so in demand and so people say the same, the bread is already half eaten before I get home. It's if you make a product like that, then it's gonna be successful.
And I think it comes down, like you said, we're creating a connection and community more than just a product that you eat.
Exactly. And there's some value in that.
Yeah. And community is needed. Mm-hmm. Wow. I love that perspective. We are reaching the end here. I would love to hear just a quick fun answer. What is your very favorite bread to bake?
I really got into fresh milled grains and trying to do 100% whole wheat or rye, not 100% rye maybe, but high freshly milled. I think the nuttiness of it and the complexity of it, I'm not so much anymore into these sort of 100% white loaves. And I've got all my bins here, and I love just mixing things up and see what comes out. I think I've been using a lot of central milling, which I think is very popular. I've been also recently using sunrise mills, which is a heritage grain. It's an older grain. It's a bit more expensive, but it's beautiful, beautiful flour. Yeah, and then I'll just throw in some buckwheat. And I always make, a walnut, in winter and fall or something, a loaf with walnuts, more darker loaf with walnuts. And if you leave that a few days on the counter, that becomes really tasty. It's super.
Amazing. So do you have a favorite, an ingredient that you feel doesn't get appreciated enough? Would it be, you mentioned buckwheat or something that you
maybe buckwheat? Yeah, buckwheat. I'm more a purist in the sense of, jalapeno cheddar, not for me. I know a lot of people love it and it's a great seller, but I'm just more, for example, Central Milling has this old country, which is probably closest what I can find to French flour, right? Because it's got a little bit of the ash in it. So I just think that makes beautiful, tasty loaves and just all-purpose white flour.
I agree. I'm a purist too. I have to bake the jalapeno cheddar because people get mad if I don't. I don't need it. I've been a really big fan of the sunrise flour too. And my husband said it tastes better.
Yeah. It's so much more complex and rich. We can afford it.
Yeah. This has been just such a wonderful conversation. I've loved hearing a little more about your story and your insights. And I am a huge fan of your company and the people behind the company. And thank you for serving the community so well. If anyone wants to reach out to you, whether they are a travel agent or just interested in baking bread,
just want to talk,
how can they get in touch with you?
Yeah, probably the easiest is our website, simply-bread.co. And we also have a pretty active Facebook community. If you search on Facebook groups for Simply Bread community, you'll probably find us. And otherwise, just fill in a form on our website or send us an email at info@simply-bread.co, or you can email me personally on the same domain with Stijn, STIGM, at simplybread.co.
Okay. I'll put those links down in the show notes so people can grab them from there. And as always, when I close out the show, I invite people to take a screenshot and tag me. I'm Caroline Bauer _sourdough, and then tag Simply Bread on Instagram as well, so we can all connect and see where we're all listening from. So this has been a wonderful conversation. I'll be back soon with another episode. But until then, happy baking.